Hey guys, and welcome back to Proper Chuffed. My name's Hilton and I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but that is half the fun of this, isn't it? Before we begin, if you're new to the channel and you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back guys, it's good to see you again. The theme of this week's video is green. That's it, that's the theme, that's the subject, it's just green. This week, in pretty much every spare moment I've had, I've spent it working on Dun Roman and greening it up finally. I am so happy to finally add a little bit of life to my humble little Scottish West Highland Railway. Now there's one thing that popped up quite a few times in last week's video in the comments section, and that was that a few people were a little bit confused about my layout. They saw the addition of the avalanche tunnel and quite a few people raised a fair point, which was, why is that avalanche tunnel on the West Highland Line if this is an extension from the Fort William to Mallaig route? And fair point and point taken. I have decided to actually remove the avalanche tunnel because, as many people pointed out, those avalanche portals are mostly used on the Kyle line. So in the interest of being a little bit more accurate about this, I have removed the avalanche portal. And to that point, I just want to reiterate that this is a fictitious layout. It's my own made-up version of an extension between the Fort William and Mallaig route. However, I am trying to replicate as best as possible the look and feel of the West Highland Line, where my own fictitious extension takes place. So we've got that out of the way. Now let's dive into the greenery. So this week I've been primarily focusing on the station area and its surrounds. And I won't lie, once I get going with this part, I really can't stop myself. It becomes a bit of a snowball effect as I just do one thing after another because I'm just so energized by this process. This is by far and away my absolute favorite part of building a layout. I mean, granted, this is only my second layout, but it's easily the best part by a long shot. So first things first, if you saw my previous video, you'll notice that I had started flocking certain sections of the railway just to give it a nice ground cover. I use a Woodland Scenics flock and it really works super well to give you a very textured, fine ground cover that you can use a little bit later on. The only thing I'll say about the flocking is just to make sure that it really is locked in. Otherwise, later when it comes to static grass, with tacky, sticky wood glue, you might find that a lot of that flock actually just lifts up and gets stuck to it, which can be kind of annoying because then it sort of dilutes your glue and it's just a bit of a mess. So make sure that your flock is always super locked down. In preparation for the rest of the scenics, this past week, I began flocking, well, the entire layout basically. Everywhere where I thought there was going to be some kind of grass or natural vegetation, I made sure that it got a solid layer of flock put onto it. I also, as you can see up here, used a variation of different flock colors just to give it a little bit more of a different interest. And while this looks actually absolutely awesome on its own, it's certainly only the first step in bringing the greenery of the West Highland to life. But today we pretty much pick up where we left off with the previous video, starting with the wall and a little bit of moss textures. So let's dive straight into it. So in an effort to liven up the wall, I begin by using the AK Wargaming's Moss Deposits paint on. This is a really simple and effective paint that helps you bring things to life a little bit more. And unfortunately, because I'm a stupid idiot, my hand is in the way of pretty much this entire shot. But essentially we start painting this on in a randomized pattern, applying it wherever it feels like moss would grow naturally. However, this wasn't enough for me. I needed something with a bit more texture to it. So I decided to apply some watered down wood glue randomly across the brick face and then just chuck on a little bit of green flock. And this really gave it a nice texture. Quite satisfied with this, and still ignoring the fact that I needed buttresses, I pressed on. Next up, it was time to add a little bit of ivy. This I picked up from a local supplier, the Model Train Shop. A big thank you to my friend Rinka for always supplying me with some really well-priced scenics. Now, this is actually a Boston ivy, and it comes in a small packet that you just sort of stretch out. It's got these fibrous sort of roots to it, and then there's these beautiful little leaves that are attached to it also. So if you stretch it out like this across a wall, you really do get a very natural looking ivy. To make sure that it's locked down a little bit better, all you need to do is drip down some watered down PVA glue just behind it to make sure that it locks in. So in the previous video, I put a retaining wall into the layout. This is to essentially hold back the upper line from the lower one. And many of you actually pointed out that I really should have added some buttresses along that wall to make it look a little bit more realistic. And I really do appreciate that, because I've taken that into account. And this past week, I did add indeed some buttresses. One of the things that tends to occur when I'm doing scenic work is that this entire work area just gets completely messed up. And I'm super glad actually that I've kept these portions of the layout open still, because they serve as really good tables. With the retaining wall taken care of, it's time to move on to a little bit of foliage. Now, I want this station section to be a really sort of overgrown, natural looking setting, as if the land is trying to reclaim what once belonged to it. With that in mind, and the sort of late spring, early summer look and feel that I'm trying to go for, it's time to get some shrubbery all across the station section. So I'm using a different collection of all sorts of small flocking bushes that I can tease, spread out, and really start bringing this all to life. And I start with one color usually, because it gives me a good idea of what other colors to add a little bit later. I think one of the things I've realized while I've been doing this is that natural variance is ever so important. You can go completely crazy with colors here, as long as they're all within the same sort of vein, and obviously for me, that would be green. There are natural occurrences of red bushes, or sometimes a very sandy yellow. And while I haven't added those to this particular layout, there might be room for it in the future. So let's dive straight into the wild. So to kick things off, I made sure that the lower section was essentially covered in this lime green bush texture. This comes in a clear plastic packet, so I actually don't know what the brand is, but it's really good because it's got a fibrous sort of root behind it that looks quite natural and sort of pops out every now and then between bushes. Once I had glued it into position, all I really needed to do was use my scissors and just trim off sections where the roots were either too long and sticking out, or the bush was encroaching on the track. The next step is easily one of the most satisfying, and that is the static grass. I use a 3:1 ratio of wood glue to water. This way the wood glue isn't too gummy, and it's a lot easier to apply, especially on top of flock. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that your flock is set down strongly, as otherwise it'll just lift when you apply this gummy paste. I'm going to dot this sporadically across the top of the line and along the hillside here. What we want to do is create a natural variance in the grass. I'm using several different grasses of different lengths, from as short as 2 millimeters to as long as 12 millimeters. And I think a really smart thing to do is to make sure that you do these in separate patches and then sort of combine different grasses together in your hopper and apply them together. That way you get a lot of variance and it doesn't look too structured. It's important to note that I don't want the line side to be a clean one. Essentially, we want some wild grass next to the line, and it's intended to be one of the more hard to reach points of my West Highland Line. I'm also applying a similar static grass to the lower section just below the brick wall. I don't want this section to be completely open. It needs to look like, again, nature is coming back to reclaim what once belonged to it. So we've got grass growing right next to the line on the lower section too. And later along the line, I'll dot this with all sorts of shrubs and different plants just to make sure that it looks a little bit more complete and not just super clean green grass. So it might seem like we're just jumping all over the place all the time here, and that's kind of how I do things, because while I'm waiting for one thing to dry, I jump to another section and cover that as best I can. So again, we're back at the top line, and I'm applying a different type of grass to the other side of the line just to give it a bit of variation in color. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll come back to this one more time to just add a little bit of a different texture of static grass. On the northern section of the station, I'm doing a similar thing and adding a little bit more of that beautiful spring green grass, just so that we start covering up that brown dirt that I added in the previous video and making it look like the natural world is closing in on the line. On top of this, I'm also adding a few extra bits of the clump foliage from Woodland Scenics. This green that I'm adding now is particularly stark, but once it's blended in with other more natural looking colors, it actually fits the part quite well. But I certainly wouldn't recommend making an entire bush line of this particular color. While sort of pre-made bushes are great and everything, it's also quite fun to make your own. I've got this very strange moss-like texture that I've spray painted a dark brown because it was initially quite a yellowy white color, and it's really great to work with. It feels absolutely natural. It reminds me a little bit of sea foam, but it's slightly finer, and I picked this up from Rinka at the model train shop. So I can't tell you exactly what it is, but you're roughly looking for some sort of dried up moss essentially that you can spray paint and then use on the layout. So I'll show you how I use this now. So here's the fun part where I get to make some of my own bushes. Using the spray painted seafoam texture moss, I just make a small little clump, flatten it on the table to give it a little bit of a hardness, and then push it into the static grass that's already been applied. Once it's in position and I'm happy with it, I give it a small blast of hairspray, the extra firm holding type, and then just cover it in a little bit of flock. I use a particular green flock from Woodland Scenics, and this really does make for a fine bush in my opinion. What's fun with these bushes is that you can create a bunch of different varieties depending on the flock that's available to you. Some might be very fine flock, others a little bit thicker, but you can create a lot of variation in this process. So I highly recommend experimenting and playing with different colors to see what suits your layout best. Of particular note, I decided that I would cover up some of the sections close to the back scene with a row of bushes too. While I intend for this to be a wooded area, I do think it's pertinent to try and tie the actual landscape into the back scene boards, and I find that bushes do this job fairly well. So I'm just creating a bunch of different varieties of bush to tie it in. Something I only really thought about halfway through this process was the variety in ground cover. Quite often in Scotland and the West Highlands, there are sort of large rocks of different colors and varieties spread out throughout the landscape. And paying close attention to Flickr, my new favorite website for railway references, I noticed there was often different colors of stone in and around the West Highland Line. So experimenting with this, I took some rather large granules of a white-grey ballast and started sporadically laying them down in the grass. I pushed them down with my finger and then actually used a vacuum to vacuum up all of the excess ones that were lying too high on top of the grass. I then used some static grass on top of these rocks once they had been locked in with a bit of glue and hairspray, and I think the result is really quite outstanding. What you're left with is the insinuation of different ground cover below the grass level. And I made sure to not overdo this, but place rocks in areas where I think there would have been a natural runoff or fall off of rocks from down the hill into different gullies or open tracts of land that had not seen much movement at all. I've had a few questions as to what is going to happen under the bridge. Am I creating a river under it? In short, no, there will be no river. However, there will be a dry riverbed. I really like the idea that about a century ago, Loch Luda was dammed up and its connecting rivers were all cut off to make way for the Dunroman extension. So unfortunately in doing so, this river was blocked off. And as a result, over time, it's dried up and turned into a little bit of a natural wilderness. Quite rocky and a lot of bushes. And we're only just getting started with it, but I'll take you through the progress so far. Now, as I mentioned, I want this to feel like a dry riverbed. So to begin this process, I began by laying down some very fine gravel to the baseboard and ensuring that it was patted down correctly with a thick bristle brush, and just making sure that I got through all the nooks and crannies around the bridge to make sure that it was as realistic as possible, should you be able to see any of that. And then I applied some watered down PVA to kind of lock the stones into position. I also went into my garden and found some suitable rocks that would serve as boulders for the dry riverbed, and then added different variations of smaller stones on top of all of this to complete the look. Finally, once all of this had dried, I applied a layer of the Woodland Scenics concrete paint color to some of the rocks in the riverbed. This just tones them down and gives them a similar color, but more work is needed, but we will eventually add a wash to this and add all the bushes and vegetation in the dry riverbed. Finally, once I'm happy with most of the shrubbery around this area, it's time to add some trees. Now, I want Dunroman to feel like a cozy little spot, a break in the Highlands where things feel naturally cradled by a couple of trees. Once again, these trees I picked up from my local model train shop, but I got a couple different variations of color, and I managed to drop them down in different positions. Admittedly, it wasn't as simple as this, but I played around with locations for a while and eventually settled on something I really liked. So here we are, finally done and dusted. Well, not completely. There's still a lot of small bits that I want to add. There are still a lot of things I want to do to this, and you'll see that progress come to life over the next couple weeks. As I mentioned in the previous video, this is about not rushing, and you might think, wow, Hilton, you've really done quite a lot in the past week alone. And yes, I have, but trust me when I say that if I have the time and the availability, fortunately, I don't have kids, not yet anyways. So when things do calm down and I do have an opportunity to come down here, especially when I'm doing something like this, I just get absolutely lost in it, put on a couple playlists and just lose myself in this process. It really is just so energizing to me to sort of see small tiny scenes kind of come to life one by one, and you can just build them up as they come. I really love this part. There's still a lot I want to do to this. Obviously, I still need to finish the dry riverbed. I want to put in a couple of smaller details, including this tiny barbed wire fence from Woodland Scenics, so I'll do that next week. I might add a little bit more color to this, just maybe depending on the variation of what I have available to me. But to be honest with you, as a look and feel, I do feel like I've kind of got it, hopefully. I think the addition of smaller details like the rocks hidden inside the grass really do bring it to life a little bit more. There's something about going the extra step when you've got time on your side that really makes it come together in a really special way. I'm really happy with it. I'd love to know what you guys think about it. Please do let me know in the comments below. I think one of the most important parts of this process was using the natural vegetation that's here to complement my sister's back scene. While I don't want to overpower the scene itself, it's been really interesting to see how positioning of shrubs, vegetation and trees can really help enhance the back scene as opposed to take away from it. You might look at this at eye height and think that, we've lost quite a lot of detail just above the track there on the back scene itself, but I think that it actually enhances certain aspects. It gives it a lot more depth and distance to it. Especially if you work on the height and depth of trees, you can create this sort of illusion that things are a little bit further away than they really are. And one of the shackles I've sort of had to break in my head in the last week was that nothing can be symmetrical by any means. Everything has to be random, but within that randomness, there's also the ability to be artistic, right? You, as the creator of this, can really enhance things. And while I stress it obviously must be random to some degree, you can certainly look at where the peaks, valleys, and where you want a little bit more distance. A prime example of this is right here on this board. We have this little mound that's covered in grass just behind it, and I think it was important to sort of stress that leads into something. So we've got the trees in front of it here, and because the line dips away, it does feel like there's a small gully in between that and the upcoming hill that appears on the back scene. So there's lots of small little things that you can play with here and there, and I just find this process just absolutely brilliant. This area is where I kind of always planned on starting out from, because once I've got these colors fixed in, I know how they dictate the rest of the layout, so I'll be working outwards on both sides. And I intend to have a fair bit of variation. I do want it to feel like there are different biomes within the West Highland Line that I want to capture. For example, pine trees. In fact, we might just start with those in the next video. We'll see. So again, I'd love to know what you guys think about this. Have I done the West Highlands justice in this sense? Does it feel natural enough and wild enough? Because I've been poring over tons and tons of footage just to make sure that I'm kind of capturing the right look and feel of this. And I hope I have. I just want to announce that I am starting a new series this weekend, and it launches on Saturday the 7th of June in the evening. I'm really excited about who's joining me for the first episode, because it's no other than my own Annie. I think it was a while back we decided to do a Q&A video, and we never actually got round to it, but she's finally agreed to join me on this new series, so I am really looking forward to it. I wanted to ask that if you have any questions for Annie and I, that you drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, I'm going to put out a community post a little bit later this week announcing the new series too, and you can drop your comments there too, or questions if you will. We'd really like as many questions as possible. This new series is very close to my heart, and it's going to be something a little bit different. Don't worry, it will still involve railways and modeling, but we're both pretty excited to field some of your questions. So please don't let me down and give me some good questions if you will. There's still so much yet to do. And I look forward to every step of this process from this point onwards, because this really is just a super exciting time to see this landscape, this little world come to life. Before we finish, I just want to thank my West Highland supporters, and your contribution goes a long way to making the channel a better place for everyone. So thank you to Annie, Mystic Brick, Simon Thompson, Bill from 3B Rail, Josie Bill, Tony from Choberton Junction, Derek L, James from the Little Western Model Railway, Dan from Pedantic Mongrels Railway Channel, Joachim Bengston, Tim, Clagfest, McDave, Chris from Valleys 5600, Emperor's Path, Rob from the Kiln Line, and our newest member, Johnny the 62C Workbench. If you guys are on Instagram, go check out Johnny's page, the 62C Workbench. Johnny does some really incredible model photography. He's also a member of the SRPS. And wouldn't you know it, he's appearing on the Shunting Yard live stream this week. So you can find him and the Jacobite live on Thursday evening with me from 8 p.m. UK time on the 5th of June. And if you're watching this in the future, you can just go back and watch the stream if you want, because it's ScotRail week and we're talking about all things Scottish Railways. I just want to also thank you, my subscribers, for all of your support. Week in and week out, you guys tune in and watch this content, and I really do appreciate it. I know it's a bit of a running joke that I have no idea what I'm doing, but I swear, I really don't. All of this is always new to me. I think I just have a background in models and model building enough to understand what I kind of want to do with things. And I don't always get things right. By no means am I saying that I'm a perfect channel or a perfect modeler. There's still a lot I have to learn. Regardless, I really do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for joining me. It really does mean the world. That is all I have for you this week, and I look forward to sharing what comes next. If you enjoyed this video, please drop me a like. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed and you enjoyed it and you want to see more, please consider doing so. Until I see you next time, keep your engines fired and stay on track. All the best.